It also in some ways takes away hope, and if you don't have that level of hope, you don't have that level of aspiration as an artist, it's like, what do you have? So if you don't have that from external sources, what you can do is create that hope for yourself. If you're not giving yourself those things to work towards, then you are at the mercy of everything outside of you. And if you're not getting it from an outside source, which that's unreliable. I can't rely on Warner Brothers calling me up and saying, hey, guess what? Bale's out. You want to be Batman? But I can rely on myself to say, let me create my own thing. And then the pressure's on me, and the pressure's on me to find the time and to find the energy and to also produce a product that is worthwhile. But at least I'm in control of that. And at least I have the agency there.
Hi, Bret. How you doing?
I couldn't be better. I'm sitting here with you. What's it? It's Thursday afternoon. It's going great.
Yeah, Thursday afternoon. I just want to say thank you for meeting with me and having this conversation with me. I just, I've known you since how long now?
Oh, 2012, 2013, maybe?
We were in acting class together.
That's what, 4 years ago?
Right? Yeah, exactly. Just a long time ago. We were in acting class
A couple
together.
gray hairs ago,
Yeah, and I remember a time where you introduced, well, you were one of the factors in helping me get my first representation. And so
Yes.
and we're still in the game. Here we are.
Yeah.
I just wanted to talk to you about creativity. Mostly what has been my interest, my shift in life as of late is instead of just only looking at the end result or I must be in this and this and this by this time. What does it look like to really enjoy the idea of creativity? And what is it to maybe create just to create? You can still have an end goal in mind, but not only have it be about that. And so I thought it would be really cool to have conversations with people in my life, people who I know who I think are doing interesting things and discuss what that looks like for them.
Well, I don't know if I'm doing anything interesting, but I'm happy to talk to you.
Of course you are. So I know that during the pandemic, you made a film, right? The Andy Baker's tape. And I just wanted to ask you, how did that idea come about? What made you bring that to reality?
Yeah, I mean, it's like you said, we're kind of in these things for the long haul, and what do you do to stay creative and pushing yourself forward through in kind of like a really strange time. So, that's when the world was in a hiatus. We were shut down. There was no auditions. There was nothing. I was taking an online acting class because you couldn't go to studios just to keep busy. And I had a buddy at the time who was in the Blue Man Group, and he was the same way. He was out of work, out of shows. I gave up my apartment in New York, and I was living in a beach house in New Jersey, which is great. But I think the danger of that is that, you can just get used to enjoying margaritas on the beach and watch the sunset. So I started, I guess it was the top of the pandemic. I got this grant through SAG and I put it towards a camera. I wanted to learn how to shoot a little bit better. So I was shooting some short films in my apartment, just to pass the time and to play with this new camera that I got. And my buddy who was in the Blue Man Group reached out and he said, you know what, I want to be part of this. I want to do something. So, we scripted out a few more shorts. Some were terrible, some were okay. And then we said, why don't we take a road trip across the country and let's shoot a mockumentary movie. And we were going to do it kind of, Christopher Guest, improv, found footage style, all mixed together. Drive out to Mount Rushmore and kind of do this American Heart of Darkness story where it was the two of us in a car, very politically charged. Then we kind of realized that I think the world was going through such a rough time that no one wanted to see, this heavy political story. So we tried to, I guess, kind of find a unique twist to it and make it more personal and a little bit more comical. And we're both from New Jersey, so we decided to make the film about a food blogger in New Jersey who's going around to all the local restaurants trying to get produced by the Food Network. And that allowed us to, shoot in our hometowns and kind of pay homage to all the places that we grew up going to. But also, it's, it was just familiar territory for us. So we ended up scripting it out over the course of That's 3 or 4 months. We got a pretty tight script for it. And then we just said, can I curse on this? We just said, fuck.
Yeah.
We just,
Cool.
and, let's go. We shot for about 2.5 weeks. We had, it was a learning experience, because when you're, focused on doing camera work, on doing sound work, on, making sure that everything is lined up properly, there's no teams around us. It was us two guys.
So you shot it without a cameraman.
No, it's found footage style. So we were the cameramen doing it. So everything that we did, we were setting up, lining up the shots, making sure that we're in focus. And one of the things that we made a mistake with doing is that most found footage is shot on a camcorder. So when you shoot on a camcorder, you're not worried about exposure. You're not worried about, staying things in focus, because the way the aperture is set up, everything's exposed, everything's in focus. I had a Panasonic GH5 at the time, which is a low-grade cinema camera. So that's the hardest thing to shoot that kind of stuff with. As soon as you turn the camera around, stuff's out of focus. It's overexposed, underexposed, and we learned that the hard way. But halfway through, we're like, well, we're committed to this bit right now, so we got to finish it. And we just kind of plowed through, and eventually we got it all done.
The script is so tight. How did you get to the point that you had I feel like the script is really tight. How did you have any guidance, or were you just like, this is the best we can do and here we go? Or
Yeah,
have you had other experience before in writing?
that's a great question. I'm glad that you think the script is tight. I don't know if everyone, but yeah, of course, like I have, I had some experience in 2018 where I helped produce, cast, and act in, feature we shot around New York City, which had a $58,000 budget at the time, and we did 109 pages in 9 days, which in New York is the stuff that nightmares are made of. You can only imagine the shit that we went through doing that. But doing that was just kind of like a crash course in guerrilla filmmaking. And the guy that wrote that and directed is this guy, Shawnee Shagru, who is just a master writer. Excellent. He was a drummer, and a bartender, and he's the kind of guy that gets addicted to stuff in the best way. So, he just was writing scripts after script after script, and self-taught himself, became a master writer in the vein of, I'd say he's like Tarantino meets Guy Ritchie meets Martin McDonagh, and I've always kind of leaned on Shawnee for advice. I worked with Dustin Fontaine in the Andy Baker tape. He plays Andy Baker. When we were first devising the scripts, we just improvised a lot. We understood script structure. We followed a pretty tight script structure. But to make the dialogue as authentic as possible, which you kind of have to do in a found footage, we would get stuck in scenes. We would just improv our ways out of it. And if something worked, we're like, hey, let's use that. Let's write this down. And we would take that. So after we had, I think I went through about 5 or 6 passes of the first script, sent that over to Shawnee. Shawnee had some notes. He's like, the guys are bickering the entire time, blah, blah, blah. You got to change this around, So I listened to what Shawnee said, and then I sent it to some other people. One of our producers was this girl, Caitlin Borick, and she did an excellent job. So she helped review the script. And then it was certainly the brainchild of Dustin and myself, but, we never said no to outside input. I think at the end of the day, you kind of have to rely on your own litmus test for what works and what doesn't work. But I think there's no such thing as bad advice. Even if you don't agree with something, you don't have to use it as long as you trust the sources, I think. I mean, I guess that's not true. There is such thing as bad advice, but it's how you filter it through yourself. And if you can see believing in something and use that, get the feedback, take the feedback.
I think it's really cool, though, two performers go to write a script, and what they do is put it on its feet and feel it out and explore it. And, through the medium of which they mostly work in, to create that on the page. And that's in a amazingly creative way to get to an end result. Some people start at the page, then end in performance, but you're in performance to create the page, then to bring it back in front of the camera, which is sort of really
Yeah, I
cool.
think as an artist, you're trying to merge your left brain and your right brain. You're trying to merge your logic with your intuition, and doing that is definitely a synthesis of using your playful side. Not just doing it like structure. And I had this conversation actually with an actor last night. We were talking about how the way that some actors, some writers approach things. And I'm not saying that this is wrong, but it's a very logic based science. And I think that science and art don't necessarily go hand in hand. You kind of have to develop that intuition to it and you develop that artistic taste. Now, you look at great actors, you look at someone like Mark Rylance, for instance. Mark Rylance is, he trained at the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art. So it's super structured acting. He understands. I mean, he ran the Globe. Was it the Globe Theater? Well, yeah, what one of the big theaters in London. He's a master Shakespeare actor, so he understands structure, he understands beats, he understands punctuation, but he has such a sense of play. So it's like he's merging all this structure and I would say the science of it with the play, and that's what makes him such a unique person. And it's you watch guys like I'm thinking about like Al Pacino in the movie Heat. Al Pacino also has all that structure, but he's just so full of energy and play and like not afraid to just throw it all out there. But if you have one without the other, if you have too much play and not enough structure, then you're just kind of like this free basing entity. So, it really is merging the left and the right brain so they're working together in harmony. And I think that is that's the
The
height
magic.
of artistry. Yeah, really assimilate both hemispheres of the brain.
So in independent filmmaking, I find that there are limitations to what you can and cannot do.
How so?
But I want to know how that informed like what you wanted to do versus what you were
Sure.
capable of doing.
Yeah, that's a great question. And, I think in this, our kind of underlying motto was embrace the limitations because, we shot during COVID. So, we shot, and because of that, we couldn't have a DP on set. We couldn't have anything. We didn't work with anyone. We didn't have a sound crew. It was just the two of us. Those limitations forced us to make it a found footage film. So making it a found footage, it was us using the camera. It was us figuring out the sound with that. And that was really if this was shot like a traditional narrative, the movie wouldn't have worked. It had to be done as a found footage film. I think our budget on the film at the time, I think we probably spent, this is not including festival submissions or touring the film around the country, maybe $1,800. And I think $600 of that went to a brand new G drive and a few, some of it was just for hotels, for cabins that we rented, for food during it. But it was bare bones, so it's like, you're forced to do something bare bones. It forces you to be scrappy. And, for instance, one of the scenes that we had, and I've talked about this before, but we, we're food bloggers. So we're going around, we're touring all these restaurants in New Jersey. We got about $150 worth of food from this turkey farm in New Jersey, which they asked me not to use their name, but I love them. So if you're in South Jersey and you stumble across a turkey farm, give them the business. Okay. And anyway, so we're in a farm field and the sun is going down. So we're going to lose light. Okay. We need to make it look natural. And how do we save this? And, we kind of MacGyver the situation to where we found a dumpster. We flipped the dumpster on its side, shoved the camera in there, which made a makeshift Faraday cage. So we're shooting this entire scene, eating all this food, but it's also 85 degrees in August or October. And, it's just the smell that's wafting out of the dumpster as we're doing this, but we're trying to keep it together just to get the shot done. And then on top of it, we're shooting this at the farm. Like we kind of were doing, again, we're doing this real quick. And then the owners of the farm come over. They're like, what are you guys doing? And we're like, live real fast. We're like, you know what? We're YouTube food bloggers, which is what we were playing in the movie. And we're making, and the guy's like, oh. And then I told him, he goes, where are you from? I said, I went to Point Beach High School. He goes, oh, my nephew went to Point Beach High School, and I knew the nephew. I said, yeah, he was a few years older than me. He goes, you know him? You know his brother? I said, yeah, I know them both. He goes, all right. Here's the deal. Put everything back. Don't show our signs in the background. You can do whatever you want, So people are, I think that if you look at a limitation as like, oh, I can't do something, you're not going to do it. If you look at as a limitation as like, this is a challenge and how do I surpass this challenge? you're going to find ways to be creative. And I think especially now in this world and this day and age that we're in now, there's so many advantages to film. I mean, it's like you have a camera in your pocket, in the 1990s, no one had that kind of stuff. You have all these extra things. So it's like you have advantages, but, it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to shoot the movie Dune on it. You're not going to have the scope of a movie like that, but there's so much that you can do. So as long as you are just open to seeing what you can make with nothing, you'll find a way to push through. I'd say nothing is ever really easy, also the way that you frame it for yourself, because like we hit so many roadblocks and obstacles doing Andy Baker, I mean, not just Andy Baker and anything. And if you frame the obstacle and you get yourself worked up and you're like, oh shit, this happened, it's like you're going to get in your head and you're going to go with that. But if you're going with nature, you know what I mean? Like shit happens. So, if like
all the
you're
time.
flowing down the river, you just go with the current of the river. If you are, getting stuck at the side of the river, you're just going to get turned into like a little eddy and just be trapped there. So it's just let that shit happen, let it go through. And that was certainly a lesson because I'm a Capricorn, and it's like I'm a perfectionist. So it was a little bit of like getting out of that perfectionist mindset and just being open to what could happen as opposed to what should happen.
It sounds like this experience was like a whole series of unexpected moments.
Yeah, I mean, like I remember the start of COVID. It was this was like February of 2020. I remember thinking like, well, I can't let my career be derailed for 5 years.
Yeah.
You're all up about that, and
Yeah.
here we are 5 years later. And some of the stuff, probably happened the best way it could have. The pandemic in some ways, while it was a horrible experience to live through and was horrible for a lot of people, I think it did force the world and myself included in that to kind of slow down and to be able to focus on what is kind of important to you, and when you're living in New York and you're in that New York City momentum of just like, go, 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 go. I have to do this. I have to go to work. I have to do this job. I have an audition. I have to do this. It's like, what are you nurturing yourself with? You can't plant seeds if, you're constantly churning up the soil. So I think at least that allowed me to slow down enough to just be like, well, I've always wanted to do this. Why not? Why not now? And if it's like, I think that's one of the issues we have today. It's like, all of a sudden you're out of school, you're into the workforce, and then you're there for 65 years, for 40 years. And then it's like, when do you have a month and a half? When do you have 2 months? When do you have 3 months off just to be like, wait a second, let me just reset, And that was at least one of the silver linings for me. Granted, I'm not discounting how bad COVID was, but for me, I guess I used it as an opportunity to reconnect to something a little bit greater than just the rat race.
I hear you saying almost like you almost have to like create something to work for or like to almost believe in. You accept the circumstances of what there is, but then you create more of it, more from it than
Yeah.
what is like given to you. I don't know if you meant to go there, but out of a scenario where it felt like maybe there were no options, that everything was stopped, that there was, it looked like all roadblocks were there. You created a way to do ultimately some of what you love and a lot of what you haven't done before, right? By yourself in that way and create more of the moment.
I think you made a great point too. No matter who you are, no matter what level you're at, there's always parameters on something, like even the biggest movies have budgets, and you're constrained by budgets, but you're also constrained by life. You're constrained by time. You're constrained by anything. I think what is making, being an artist these past few years, I think difficult for a lot of people is that the map in front of us is not laid out like it used to be. Like it used to be like in 2010. It's like, oh, we're in the golden age of TV. Everything's there. There's tons of things being filmed. And between like the COVID, the strikes, the fires in Los Angeles, everything, it's just like the level of uncertainty. And, you're not really sure what's on the other end of the rainbow right now. So in some ways, like we said, like that's a major setback. It's a major emotional setback. It also, in some ways, takes away hope, and if you don't have that level of hope, you don't have that level of aspiration as an artist, it's like, what do you have? So if you don't have that from external sources, what you can do is create that hope for yourself. And, that gets a little bit like psychological and a little woo woo, but if you're not giving yourself those things to work towards, then you are at the mercy of everything outside of you. And I think that that's kind of like this Western approach that we have to where it's like cause and effect, and it's like you're in this momentum, but like you have to give yourself those things. And if you're not getting it from an outside source, which that's unreliable. I can't rely on Warner Brothers calling me up and saying, hey, guess what? Bale's out. You want to be Batman? But what I can do is, I can rely on myself to say, let me create my own thing, and like the pressure's on me, and the pressure's on me to find the time and to find the energy and to also produce a product that is worthwhile. But at least I'm in control of that. And at least I have the agency there where, you're just, especially in this industry, it's like any artist, it's like you give that agency away to other people because you're reliant on them to give you a job, or you're reliant on their approval for something, or to be told that you're ready for something. But like, if you don't have that, then show people that you're ready.
That's how I got into doing a project like this. Before, I think I've thought of interviewing people since 2012 and hadn't done it because I felt like, oh, what should I be doing as an actor? What does that look like? This doesn't fit. How it doesn't fit, right? Even though I want to connect with people. And even when I look at the changes I've made over time, the conversation is very different now than it would have been earlier if I had started this project earlier. Now is sort of what interests me, what gets me excited, how does that fit into me as a brand, as myself? And yes, I'm an actor as well.
Yeah.
That's only one aspect of who I am and my personality and my interests. And so I when I hear you speak this way and I hear you talk about like becoming the leader and the owner of your own life and your creativity and your identity, I would say that has been a big journey. And even just me having conversations with my friends, I think it's so cool that I want to record it and share with other people. And one of the reasons I do share with other people is because I was at one point in my life a repressed artist. I knew I was an artist and I felt like, what is that going to do for me? How's that going to put food on my table? Like on my plate, right? How is that going to feed me? And I was pushed and I had high aptitude in other areas. So I went and pursued them and felt like I had no room to be creative in anything.
Yeah.
So I repressed it. But even if I was doing all those things, I could still incorporate. For me, I didn't know or didn't believe or didn't have a model or have conversations for me to listen to about people who incorporated creativity in their life in all areas, in all ways. So it's cool that as an actor or, as a human, as a creative, there are different avenues within which you can take in order to express oneself.
Yeah. Yeah. It's hard because, who was it? It's Peter Hall, I think, said like great acting's a negotiation between what's set and not set. But that's life too. It's like, yeah, everyone would love to live as just this, freelance artist constantly. But like the truth is that apartments are more expensive than they've ever been. A stick of butter, $6.49. A cup of coffee's $5 in LA right now. So it's like, if you want to live out here, you have to have some income coming in. You have to figure out something. And it's just a constant dance and negotiation between how can I carve out and how can I fight to carve out my artistic space in a world that I don't know necessarily supports it. I don't, and but craves but needs it. I mean, it's like I would say that I don't know if you feel this way, but when you walk around, like there's just this kind of a glum sense to people, and I think back to like the the late 90s, or and like, not that everything was perfect was then, but like it just, I don't know if that's just my nostalgia, but I do feel like things were a little bit happier. But like, I just remember the excitement of being like, well, there's a great new movie coming out. I can't wait to go see Independence Day, or, like, oh, the new Jurassic Park's coming out. Let's go see that. And that buzz is kind of dissipated when it comes to movies, when it comes to TV. It's like everything is second screen ready. So it's like you're watching TV, but you can also be on TikTok at the same time. And I think that, like, we have so many things bombarding us, and it's taking away somewhat of the simplicity of just like having like that afternoon movie date where you just go away to the movies. Or, like, even we're former students of Kelly Kimball. She used to always say to go on like an artist date for yourself. Go to a museum. Go to a museum, sit in silence for 3 hours and look at paintings. That does something to you. If you go to the Metropolitan Museum of Art and you're sitting in there the entire day looking at paintings, you leave, you're not trying to meditate, but you've meditated. You've spent time observing beauty. And that's why, like, you got to get out. You got to get in nature. You got to go to the beach. You have to have fresh air in your face. And I think that that's one of the tough things about, like, negotiating life as an artist, as any kind of artist, not just an actor. It's like, if art just becomes this obsession, this all-consuming thing, and your worth is just based on your productivity and your output, right now, your output and your productivity is probably not going to match your expectation. And that's just the way that the industry is going. It's the way that the world is right now. But if you're doing it to fill yourself up, or, you're doing it in service of illuminating a story that is going to connect with someone, you're probably going to leave more satiated than would you be if it's like, oh, I got to get the next paycheck. I got to do this. I have to book this job. I have to book this audition. Because that takes the fun out of it, And like we said, left brain, right brain, if it's all logic and it's all dogma about like, I have to do this, then you're losing the play. And then you're losing the reason why you get into it. Because when you're 4 and you're 5 and you're, sketching in an art book, or you're, playing make-believe with your grandma in the backyard, you don't give a shit about your fucking paycheck. You know what I mean? You care about just like that experience. And I think that that's why we are prone to this kind of career, is just to experience the disconnect from that, like, methodical working robot, eating breakfast, going to work, driving in traffic, coming home kind of lifestyle.
Yeah, I hear you with that. I find that if you only look at it for the end result, you tend to miss, like, it's almost like missing it's like eating a meal. You're eating the meal, right? But you might miss tasting the meal. I don't know. I also feel as though that maybe you won't get the chance. You may risk the chance of really getting to do what you truly love to do, or doing it enough,
Yeah.
if you're just looking for others to bring it to you.
I think you brought up some really good points, like missing the meal. That's a great analogy. But, I think about it, I can only really relate to this in kind of acting. I used to draw a lot when I was a kid. And I do a lot of, actually, I do a lot of photography now. Like, that's the way that I've kind of enjoyed being in California. I think that you have to have kind of somewhat of an end result in your head, where it's like, if I'm looking at a scene, I somewhat have to understand, or if I'm trying to create a film, I need to understand the impact that I'm trying to have on people. But if I'm just trying to play the result in a scene and like get that final moment, then you really miss like the nuanced, slow down behavior of like, let me explain, what are these moments? And then that's where you have to be open to, the detours and the curves. And it's like, same with taking photography, it's like, I could see a shot. I take the shot. I think it's great. I get it back on my computer and I'm editing it for 25 minutes. And then you realize there's so much more in the depth. There's so much more you can pull out, and that you just miss when you're looking at like the overall picture. And, again, like, I'm going to relate it back to our culture right now, but like, we are in such like a fast pace, like we have to have results. We have to have results, that we are losing that, we're losing the time of when we are really exploring how we achieve that result in the best way.
I also feel as though we are in an unprecedented time where humans are interacting with technology at a much higher, a higher frequency than ever before. And so it's almost like the input that we take in has magnified like 100-fold, right? And I find that usually creating is in a different direction.
Yeah.
And so before, while you might have had sacred time without a full input or being sold something or having things in your face all the time, you now must make a conscious effort of having hygiene. It's mental hygiene, really, of how do I have limitations on how often I'm available or accessible, reachable, or how do I create boundaries upon how much I'm consuming and what it is I'm consuming. If you're scrolling through TikTok, you might have an algorithm does control somewhat what you do, but you're not really controlling what you're consuming, as opposed to I'm going to go to Blockbuster. I like walk around, look at what video I want to watch and make a deliberate choice of what I'm consuming. And so I find as a creative, I very much am carving out time and space to move things to move things from consumption into creating.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, it's true. It's like, and when I think the last Blockbuster just went out of business and or was in Oregon. But yeah, I remember we had a Blockbuster in my hometown, but the old school store was NJ Video. I grew up in the beach in New Jersey, and man, it was a sacred night. You go out to the video store, you walk around there, they sell popcorn. I get a Hoffman's ice cream. Dad would take me home. I put on a movie for 2 hours, and it's like at that point, we didn't have, this was before I think like what? I mean, people started getting personal computers in their homes in like the early 90s, maybe 92. I think we got our first computer maybe 96, 97, but it was before like AOL Instant Messenger. No one had text messages. No one had this. Your main source was just like TV or a movie or reading a book. And even like sitting down and reading a book is like a lost form. Like I mean, I lately I've been reading a ton, but like, even now it's like I'm reading on like a Kindle, and then I get interrupted by a text message that comes through. But yeah, like you were given the 2 hours to kind of devote to something because there were no other distractions. And while technology, it's tough because like we're never going to get around the technology. We're never going to get around, people having cell phones and the need for communication. And in some ways that's great because, it's certainly improved. I guess improved is a loose term, but it's enabled us to have more communication with people, to stay connected to people, to stay connected to events. But you're right. It's like the onslaught of news that comes through on my phone. I don't ask for it. I get mainstream news alerts sent to my phone, and every single one that comes through is either like a depressing message about, or mother of three was robbed. And I'm like, I don't want to see this. It lowers my frequency. Like, granted, like that's happening, but it's like, you're like, how do I protect? I'm not asking for that. How do I protect like my mental well-being from just like, before we had access to this information 24/7, I think people had like a more upbeat sense about the state of the world. I guess that's kind of what like David Lynch was directing in Blue Velvet. It's like every little town has its dirty underbelly, and that stuff always existed. There was always these kind of crimes happening, but if it wasn't in your face all the time and you weren't constantly bombarded with like, this manslaughter happened, you might be a little bit happier. And I think that like, between, even like from 2012 to 2016 to now, the emphasis on divisive news and the news that is just polarizing people, creating fear, creating tension, it's unhealthy. And it is, I think we're like, that's why I'm equating that to some of the tension that we're feeling in this world right now, because no matter what, you're just bombarded. And then that's all people want to talk about. We talk like the office cooler talk. Everyone just wants to talk about the pop headline that happened. And every pop headline right now, there's nothing uplifting.
Yeah, right.
You're not reading the story about, the guy that saved the Dalmatian from the park.
Never.
You're reading the horror story. And it's like,
Well, what was interesting too is living in New York City the way I was living, right? Always being out, never being in my apartment, always working, doing my acting and having a job and running around having a social life. I didn't have a television. Around the pandemic, I went to go stay with, family or something for a little bit. And I turned on the TV and everything was true crime story or reality TV show where people are telling people off and backstabbing each other. Where I'm like, whoa, or the news. Such an interesting thing to have been away for so much time from watching TV. Not I watched TV because that's my career, right? But on demand. But as opposed to turning on a television and seeing what the programming is. But what I will say is for myself as a creative, so that I can figure out, like, have enough quiet in my mind to be able to put out things that I want, stories that I want to tell from my perspective. I had to take notifications off and I go seek it when I need to. Like, I regularly go see, but I go to it instead of it coming to me at any given time all the time.
yeah,
Which has made a difference. And then, of course, like, I don't know, managing how much time I'm consuming the social media is a whole other thing. But I did want to ask you, when you completed shooting the film, was there like a sense of completion there, or was there like almost starting a whole new phase of filmmaking? I mean, I know you had to edit. Was that something that you did yourself? Did you hire someone else to do it? What was the process of I don't know, putting it out there? It was in
yeah,
film festivals.
yeah. Well, let's see. That's a multi-layered. The last 4 days of shooting were an absolute nightmare. And I just mean that it was we underestimated how difficult it was going to be to pull off this final shot. And the final scene is about a 15-minute scene that's all shot single take, but we have multiple, like we're cutting and it's hidden from the audience. It involves driving in a car, driving away. The big climactic scene happens that was very difficult to do. And we attempted it the first night and we failed miserably. And we regrouped for it. The next day, tensions were certainly high because, we're on probably 4 hours sleep, came off a brutal night from before, we're trying to figure out how to get this all done. And we got done at 6 a.m. So I think it was an 18-hour day, but we got it. Good. It was a big relief when we finished filming. I celebrated that day by going to the local Olive Garden and having a limited soup, salad, and breadsticks just to calm nerves. And then I gave it about a week and a half before I started editing. Now, I did all the editing myself. Like I said,
Had you ever edited before?
Yes, I know how to edit, and I do a lot of like in between acting jobs, freelance color grading, freelance editing. I never edited a full feature to myself, but I understood the narrative that I wanted to tell, and I only really trusted myself with that, and I absolutely did ask. Once I put together cuts and once I worked through things, I opened it up to a little bit of note sessions with producers and trusted people, about what can we deduce, and I think that's one of the tough things with editing is that you want to get to a final product. However, if you rush to really get to that, you don't really know what you can develop a moment into. So what I like to do is over put things in and make it longer and longer and longer. And the process of editing for us was just finding how we could maintain the themes, how we could maintain the structure, while keeping it as tight, as succinct as possible. Now, the difficulty with editing found footage is that, I have no place to cut away in a scene because you have to create the illusion that the camera is rolling at all times. So it's like if there's a bad acting moment, that's really tough to hide, or if there's a moment that, you can make a little bit faster with a cut. So you have to get really creative in the editing of that. So that was a lot of finagling. And then when it came down to doing sound work, I'm lucky. This is where having a network of people that you're friends with can help. But I'm really good friends with this Australian radio DJ, producer, actor. His name's Arthur Giamolitis. And without Arthur, this project would have never come to fruition. basically did all the sound work for us. So I knew nothing about sound engineering. That's not anything that I've really touched. He understood, he's such a master at, using compressors and EQs and being able to pull out voices in a natural way. So I did about 18 passes of sound with Arthur. I think we had 8 final passes to put in. Like again, like we're not shooting Dune, so we don't need to add all this extra Foley noise, but like we did need to create a natural experience of background noise and make it feel like that we're really going through the environments that we are. So we did a lot of like really natural soundscapes, worked on that. Then the color grading came, and I knew nothing about color grading at the time. So about 2.5 months into editing this, and I didn't really have the budget at the time. It was the top of the pandemic to export this to a colorist, for whatever $5,000 or $6,000, probably bare minimum. So I took an online course in color grading, taught myself, did about 4 different passes of the film. If I were to attack it now, I probably could do a better job, but at the time I did the best that I could, and I'm happy with it. Again, like I said, I didn't have to, make it look like the newest Batman, with these beautiful black and orange highlights and everything. But what we needed to do is just make it look natural and also create a uniform tone, because we did
Consistency, yeah.
2 cameras throughout. So as long as I was able to pull that out, that's what I needed to do. So I did that. And then I enlisted the help again. I have a lot of friends, and it helps to have friends that are artists that can help you. One is my friend Matt DeBrow. He runs a band, Matt DeBrow and the Captives, and he completely scored the movie for us. We originally used licensed music that my Australian DJ friend put in. However, the music was only licensed to Australia. So when we kind of went through to sell the movie, once we eventually sold the movie, we have to send the licensing report in, and then we realized that everything that we used in the film was in there illegally. So I had no idea. So it's like
All that work.
the movie's already sold. I have to get it out to the distributor. So I reach out to Matt. Matt wrote one of the last songs for us in the movie Family when we first did it, which is, kind of just the perfect ending song to the film. And I said, Matt, listen, we're up Schitt's Creek right now. I cannot use any music. What do we have? And he opened up his library to us. He is supremely talented. He has such a unique kind of country bluegrass style, and it just kind of fit into the folk of Andy Baker. And then I have another friend, Jerome Schuler. He's an actor down in Atlanta who's also an R&B artist, and he gave us some of his library. And I put in one of Jerome's songs at the end during the climax, and it actually worked so much better than the original songs that we had.
There was a lot of work that was put into it, I'm sure, to play it out. And then for you to have to redo it can be disheartening, but then for it to turn out different and better in a way.
I watched this movie play 38 film festivals. I went to every single one. I watched it with audiences. I watched the responses from the audiences. And I was kind of married to the idea. I was married to the idea of the songs that were in there. One of the songs we had in the beginning was this funky bluegrass song. And now when I look back at the older cut compared to the newer cut, I'm so much happier that mistake happened, because it's better. Number one, I'm also using my friends. I'm giving my friends
opportunities.
Yeah, I'm giving my friend, well, not opportunities, but I'm just giving them I get to use people that I'm close to. I think that feels better, to just have that energy as part of your project. But the songs are better. If I were to crumble, like we talked about, when you're faced with these challenges, if I had a $60,000 budget, I could have paid for the songs. I think that's what the record company quoted us, but we didn't. So I embraced that struggle, because I was forced to, not because I wanted to, and it actually worked out better for us. So again, like I said, these accidents sometimes show up in your favor. And
you said 38 films?
38, yeah, 38.
Wow.
Yeah.
That in of itself, submitting, paying, preparing for that is a big deal.
Yeah, and it was all over the country. We toured all over the country with this. So I was all over. I was in Coronado Island. We played in Canada. Played in upstate New York. Down south, all over the place. Now South Carolina. So Yeah, the festival submission and this was my first feature. So I was like, if I'm gonna do this, I'm gonna go out with a bang. So we kind of just went balls to the wall. And yeah, I think the first batch was about 55 submissions. And then by the end of it, I'm sure I submitted. I think our acceptance rate to film festivals for a feature film was 38%, which that's a pretty I'm not saying this to toot my horn. That's a really strong number to have,
Hmm.
most, especially as a feature, most features, even if you make 10% of your submissions, that's big. But and with that, we had some big hitters on the list that we played. So it was unexpected, because when we first shot this movie, again, we didn't shoot this with the idea of like, hey, we're gonna, play every film festival and we're gonna sell this. We were just doing this for ourselves. And
Hmm.
you know, once we got it going, it kind of turned into something that none of us actually expected. And we just kind of went along for the ride.
What was it like being for the first time watching it with an audience?
Yeah, it's interesting. The first person that saw it, besides I watched it with Caitlin Bork, my producer, many times we went through. And then the first person who saw it was my dad. And I brought it over to, my dad was, I think the night that we finished, I already said, "There, we're done." So I brought it over, I showed him the screener, and my dad is very unresponsive. He's very unreactive. And he's just kind of watching the entire thing like this, but he's not like blinking, he's just watching it. And he didn't say a word the entire time. He was kind of like chuckling at someone, but he's just like looking through. And I remember he just turned and he goes, "I couldn't turn away from that." So it was like, usually my dad's always very supportive. I don't think my dad's ever said anything bad about some of my performances, but, I'm sure he's seen me grow. He's seen me go from doing some things that like weren't that great, to getting better and better and better. So, he called me the next day and was like, "I couldn't turn that off," So I was like, that's cool. The first festival we played, ironically, was the Garden State Film Fest, which we thought that was
Great.
a great place to premiere it. And we
Yeah.
missed the deadline for it. So I was aggressive with this, and I became really good friends with everyone that runs the Garden State Film Fest afterwards. But I basically hunted down Lauren Contashehe, and I really hope I said her last name right. And I said, "Listen, I know submissions are over. I got this movie. It's a Jersey film. All right, we're Jersey guys doing this. Can we at least get a late admission screen?" He goes, "No, no, no. We're all booked for the year. We have our lineup." And I begged. She finally relented. She says, "All right, I'll give you a late waiver. Send it over." Okay. Didn't hear anything. Then all of a sudden I see on Vimeo, where I have it hosted, that there's like 13 views or something. It's like all from New Jersey. So I was like, it's being watched. Then I think a week and a half after that, we found out that we were going to premiere there. And I think that was just the perfect place for it. So that's where I had all my friends coming to see it. All my friends were going to show up there. It was still, though, it was January of 2021. So this was the height of COVID. A lot of people weren't going out. So what the Garden State Film Festival was doing to supplement that was also screening it online. They were hosting it. So I had about 150 people, like all my friends' parents that wanted to see it, everyone, they were going to watch it online that day. And then we got a phone call that the hosting service went down. So I'm like, full tickets to 150 people. What am I going to do? Figure this out. So then what we did, Caitlin and I, was that we got the movie hosted online privately, got links to everyone that was going there. So like, I sent that to all my friends' parents. Then I went to the actual premiere in person. And it was interesting because, there's some things about watching yourself on film and like watching the moments that you think are really going to land that don't land. And you're like, "Oh, wait. But then a moment lands that you have no expectation for. And you're like, where did that come from?" So seeing those responses, we got a great response afterwards, which was great. I remember the one screening we had was in Hamilton, New York, which was upstate. In Hamilton, New York, there's a festival up there run by the Slater brothers, and they're both producers. They produced a lot of films. And Hamilton, New York's this beautiful upstate New York town, and the entire town came out for this festival. And we played at this beautiful old school, almost vaudeville movie theater, and packed screening. And the energy during that was just palpable. You could I at the ending, when stuff was happening, you could just hear people gasp and scream, or like the laughter. And when you're in an audience like that, and you're feeling the ride of people, and it's just like, that's the magic of going to the movies. It's like collective consciousness of everyone that's experiencing something. It's like going to the theater and you're watching, everyone laughs at the same moments, and that laugh becomes infectious, and everyone is feeling it. You're having this collective experience with a group of strangers, and to see the film play like that was great, and that was so gratifying to have that in-person experience. And, I don't,
It's a human experience, right? To feel like a part of a collective,
yeah,
which we were talking a little bit, some of our conversation, we don't always get that experience as often nowadays.
nope.
And it's great for not only you as the creator, but also those who are there to share in your creativity, to experience that human connection.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's why we do it. We don't do it to just have I mean, like now, I guess you do, to have your stuff seen in a quiet room by yourself, but it's like I mean, I was always a film person, but like I went to drama school, and it's like, that's the energy of being on stage, that's just the energy of being in front of people, having, there's no better feeling than getting the laugh, or in a dramatic scene, when you feel the audience kind of tense up and breathe in with you, or like that lean in moment. And, the only thing that I think might be more interesting than that is, like, I'm always curious to be like, what is it like to be like the Rolling Stones, and play like 100,000 people and get that rush on stage. I can't sing for shit, so I'll never have that experience. What is it like to be on a stage like that and have 100,000 people bowing their head and like that, But, I remember seeing, I mean, I'm rambling now, but it's just, you're reminding me of so many fun experiences. I remember seeing a behanding in Spokane with my father again. And my dad's an old Christopher Walken fan, and this was a Martin McDonagh play about a guy who gets his hand chopped off, and he's trying to get his hand back. So it's Christopher Walken, and he starts the play trying to light a lighter, but he only has one hand, so he can't do it. And it ends with him trying to light the lighter again. And I just remember the entire audience is just like leaning in like this, like this, like this, like this. And he can't light the lighter and just goes, fuck it, And it's just like the entire audience was just like, hey. And if you were to have that with just like one or two people watching that, I don't think there would have been that collective sigh. But it's like, you're picking up on the energy of the person next to you and the next to you. And it's like, everyone is just like leaning in, leaning in, leaning in for this moment. And then, it's just like, that's why, like, we have to, that's why I think people go to see this stuff, because like your community, it's like everyone is having the same shared experience. And that's why, all this, storytelling, like, we're in the dangers of all this AI crap right now, and in some ways I'm like, that's never, there's just something about the human experience of like having that shared human moment with someone else that you can't replicate, because even if it is AI, you're never going to have like the flaws. You're never going to have just the, I don't know, just like the sensing of like another living, breathing human that's going through something, like a computer might be able to replicate it beautifully, but there's just that extra touch, there's just that extra thing that makes you human.
They call this the uncanny valley.
I know that.
There's a gap between.
I thought Uncanny Valley, my interpretation of it was, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but the Uncanny Valley thing is that we're always being watched by something, and that there was actually some kind of like alpha predator that was here that was kind of human but not human, that was hunting humans. So like there was a sense, like I guess like a skinwalker or something. That's my interpretation of the uncanny valley.
I know it as like a robot, like something that is not human versus something human. There's always that quality that's missing that has you identify and see that it's not
Yeah.
real, not human. And it's so palpable and so distinct that you know that you're not experiencing another human or another human having a human experience or a human connection.
Yeah, that's
Maybe we should look into it.
yeah. We have another podcast where we debate the uncanny valley theory.
Yeah, maybe we should.
Yeah. No. Yeah. Yeah. It's true. I mean, like I don't know. It's like when it's like, what was that documentary that was out about the art forgers, And they show like the Rothko art forgeries, and the Rothko art forgeries they all look excellent. There's great. And I think even like I think like even like Rothko's kid or something was fooled by one of the forgers. But when you really see it next to like the original, there's just that extra sauce, like I don't know how to describe it. It's like, there's just something different about the original, and it could be identical. I was talking about this a few nights ago too. It's like there's a video online. I think it was a Beatles tribute ceremony of Prince is on stage with Eric Clapton. You have like Eric Clapton's one of the greatest guitar players of all time. I think Santana.
Yeah.
And then you have Prince, and they're all playing the same song. And then Prince goes into the solo, and everyone else fades away. Everyone else on stage fades away. And we're talking, it's not like we're talking like some kid out of high school. We're talking Eric Clapton next to Prince.
I know.
An extra sauce that Prince has in that moment that it just steals something, and those are the qualities that you can't define in someone. You can't place your finger on why this is better, but there's just something that's flowing, that's more in sync, that is resonating with you more than the other great masters.
I do believe that art in general, the creative arts, is quite potent. And, there's a reason why dictators tend to burn books and remove their artist class, because art moves people. It changes their point of view, changes their view of the world. It can transform a whole society. And,
Look at architecture we have now compared to the architecture of the 1900s. Architecture was designed to uplift you. It was designed to make you feel like there's something greater than what you're experiencing. Now you go to like a government municipal building, it feels like a prison. You go to the post office, it's like an insane asylum. It's worse than one who's nest what they're living in. I feel bad for the postal workers having to work in there, but the old town halls or the old city hall, and they're the one in New York is this beautiful, thick structure. And we have lost that, like even the way that like the street lights are now compared to the 1900s, the way like the lamps out, we are losing that intrinsic beauty that like is somewhat of like society's debt to its citizens to uplift you and not to make you feel like you're just boxed in,
it's actually like a romancing almost. I feel like as though like, will I be romantic about life, right? What beauty do I look for? And am I able to have eyes open enough and create space to experience it? And, I guess that's why I have these conversations.
Go the Edwardian wing at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And when you walk in, you're in 30-foot ceilings. The second you walk into a ceiling like that, boom, you're just lifted up. Granted, it's Gilded Age stuff, so it's, of course, it's going to be a little bit heightened, but the sense of formality, the sense of structure, the sense of beauty, the sense of pride amongst things like that is, not that everything was better back then, but there was just, I think beauty wasn't taken for granted in a way. Beauty was kind of something that people really strove for, as opposed to just like what's functional.
Yeah. Well, when you're in New York next, we shall go to the Met.
It's a date. Let's do it.
I'd love to. Bret, thank you so much for taking the time. I do remember just truly admiring watching you in this journey of creating this film. We've known each other for a while, and I admire you as an artist. And I thank you very much for taking this time to just talk shop with me. And
Thanks for ramble, okay, and just say whatever nonsense comes into my head. I get it.
I mean, that's what it's all about. There were gems there for people. And yeah, thanks for the generosity.
Thank you for having me. It's always great to talk to you.